Good afternoon, everyone, and namaskar to all, and also happy Shivaratri if you are observing. First of all, I welcome all of you to this panel discussion on the theme climate change, agriculture, and Western Odisha implications for sustainable development goals. And let me set the context for this panel discussion. Earlier, we had planned to organize this panel discussion during the 55th annual conference of the Odisha Economics Association, which was organized at Kalahandi University, Bhavanipatna, during February 10, 11, and 12th. 10th, we had pre-conference workshop, and then 11, 12th, we had the conference. So originally, we had planned to organize this panel discussion uh, online. But we thought that since people will be busy for the physical presentations, and people may not be able to give enough time to this online panel discussion, so we thought that we doing it on the latter date. And for organizing this panel, I must thank Dr. Chandrasekhar Bahinipati, who is the executive committee member of Indian Society for Ecological Economics and currently the assistant professor at IIT Tirupati. And all the panelists, including the president of Indian Society for Ecological Economics, Professor Nilanjan Ghosh, and all the executive committee members who have approved this meeting to happen. And so let me also give a brief introduction about the Odisha Economics Association. In fact, okay, for the information of all the panelists, I am also a life member of the Indian Society for Ecological Economics, and I have attended quite a number of biennial conferences. So coming to the Odisha Economics Association, I am the secretary of Odisha Economics Association, and Professor Kesav Das is the president of Odisha Economics Association. And the Odisha Economic Association is now 55 years old, established in 1968. Now the association is 55 years old, and this is one of the oldest regional associations of the country. And we have now 765 life members, and so we have been publishing a journal called Odisha Economic Journal. Earlier it used to be Odisha Economic Journal, and this journal is now enlisted in UGC care, and we're also trying to enlist it in Scopus. Hopefully we'll be able to do that. With this brief note about the Odisha Economics Association, I now invite Professor Kesav Das to preside over the meeting, and Dr. Chandrasekhar Bahinipati will be moderating the session. Let me just welcome all the panelists. Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh, the president of Indian Society for Ecological Economics, then Dr. Pradyut Ranjan Jaina, who is working at NIT Surathkal, and Dr. Bibhu Prasad Naik, working at TIS Hyderabad, Professor Aravind Mishra, the chairperson of Development and Environment Futures Trust, Bhubaneswar. Then we have Dr. Architesh Panda, UNU EHS Bone, and this session will be moderated by Dr. Chandrasekhar Bahinipati from IIT Tirupati, and the chairperson of the session is Professor Kesav Das, the president of Odisha Economics Association. You might be knowing him. He worked at GIDR Ahmedabad for quite a long time, and now he is the visiting professor at Institute for Human Development, New Delhi. So with this, now I invite Professor Kesav Das to chair the session and take it forward. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so very much, Amarendra. But very happy welcome to everyone, and we are especially privileged to have this joint event with INSEE. In fact, it would have been great had we also met physically at Bhavanipatna, but anyway, that could not happen. But I'm also happy that maybe through this online event, there'll be more people who will be participating now or may access your insights or later. Very, very happy to see a large number of relatively, let me use the word, relatively younger people, but then doing extremely well in their profession. And so this is also a subject about which, I mean, even if I'm sort of formally whatever chairing, I should not claim that I know much about the subject. So I tried to get some information from here and there, and I sort of recognized that this is one of the very significant challenges, particularly, I mean, I happened to see a report by Kemal Dervish in 2007. It's a UN report sort of talking about how climate change is going to be devastating for the world's poor. And in that, a large number of issues, which I'm sure also will be touched upon in this panel discussion, that relates to the whole question of not just availability of water and food, but also sort of questions very directly linked to livelihood. And within that, whether it also leads to distressed migration, for instance, and what happens to health, and maybe in several dryland areas, particularly in India, or for that matter, the arid part of Odisha, that's Western Odisha. So whether it also might provoke what you may call committing suicides by farmers. And there have been several other studies, and that also includes studies by Dukhabandhu Sahu, Diptima Mishra on climate change, on its impact on agriculture. That's very interesting work done by Subal, who is very much here present. His work on the impact of climate change on agriculture in Western Odisha. I'm very happy Subal is here. And there have been other studies done by KIDA, Hyderabad, for instance, talking about how climate change might not just only affect the growth and the yield of the farm production, but also the crop pest interactions, irrigation water availability, soil processes, and its great impact on groundwater, and also sort of impacting varieties of other related livelihood sources, whether they're related to the forests or even sort of impacting the biodiversity. So I think this is a very, very challenging times that we're living, and especially because we are dealing with Western Odisha, which we know that essentially it's a largely, let's say, part of the dryland area, and so often depends upon rainfall. And there is also a large number of local crop varieties which might also be affected by the climate change. So as I said in the beginning, I'm not at all an expert on the subject, but I really truly looking forward to learning from you all. And I invite Dr. Chandrasekhar Bainpati, my old friend, colleague, to please sort of steer the meeting, and we are looking forward to your contribution. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Dr. Amendra Das and Professor Kesav Das. So hopefully I am audible.
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to let me thank also Dr. Vibhu, who is one of the panelists. Actually, he has motivated me to take this forward. That okay, so let us have a NC Odisha Economic Association panel on. He has not mentioned the topic, but okay, let us have a panel. And the topic was basically decided by me, since it was basically we were holding the conference in Western Odisha. I thought, okay, let me discuss something related to Western Odisha. So let me also mention that since I'm an executive member of the INSEE, and I guess most of you may or may not be knowing INSEE or part of the INSEE network. So we have at the national level Indian Society for Ecological Economics. So we host our office at the Institute of Economic Growth, Delhi. So we organize conference, a biennial conference, and this year I think it will happen sometime in December, January. We are yet to decide the venue, so where it will happen. But we generally organize and cover topics related to environment, ecology, and the development. So I welcome all of you. Those are not members so far, the like member of INSEE. So I will come to be member of, and also tune to the website of the EcoNC ORG, so that you can see that with the conference announced, and you can submit your paper or abstract. So basically, I think the most often we support the young scholars to come to the conference to give the financial, we also support financial support, basically the travel, accommodation, Of course, you have to do the registration, but we support the provide the travel and accommodation to the young scholars. So I welcome all of you to at least be the live member of NC as well as the tune to the website, see that okay when the conference announced. So let me come back to the talk. The panel you have said that the climate change, agriculture, and livelihood basically implications for the SDG. So basically, when I was making the plan, so I thought, okay, let me take the Western Odisha because since it was decided that the conference will host in the Western Odisha, that's Kalandi University. And when looking at the literature based on my own experience with this field for last 15 to 20 years, so there are very much less research being carried out in Western Odisha. You look at all the climate change literature from the scientists are working, or the agriculture scientists, or from the social science. So they are mostly focusing on the coastal Odisha, coastal belt, because it's mostly affected by the cyclone and flood. So they're mostly focusing on because that's a rapid disaster and which time get the limelight once the disaster hit. But looking at the slow onset disasters, which basically hit most part of the coastal Odisha. I'm not refusing that okay, drought did not hit the coastal Odisha, but drought also mostly hit the western Odisha, and there are other kinds of issues in western Odisha, and also basically it's undivided part of the KBK region. Basically, consider it that so basically underdeveloped part of India. I'm sorry, underdeveloped part of India, not only India, also part of Odisha. So therefore, I thought, okay, let us talk about that. Let us people know that okay, there is any literature, or there, what are the issues are there, what should we do. So when we are making the whom should I call, then I thought, okay, let me invite Professor Nilanjan Ghosh, so who can set the stage, although he has maybe have less knowledge about the Western Odisha, but he has a large knowledge about the climate change, agriculture, and what are the implications for the sustainable development goals. So the goals are basically with respect to the goal one, goal two, mostly the most of the goals, the 15, most of the out of the 17 goals, most of the goals could be impacted by the climate change. But the major goals basically we're looking at here, that's basically the one, two, basically three, and also other goals like the goal 13 and also goal 15. So then I request Dr. Bibu as the Dr. Jena to discuss about the impact of climate change in that particular region, and also they have done some study with respect to the adaptation. With respect to adaptation, what are the adaptation measures basically farmers are undertaking in that particular region? Because when I was doing the systematic review of the climate change adaptation in India, I found very less study in Western Odisha also, because the most studies, including my own studies, mostly in the uh, coastal part of India. So western part of India, I have done some work with the Western Odisha Rural Livelihood Program with Dr. Umesh Patnaik, who have done basically did some stuff in the Balangir and Nuapada region. So now, then I'll request Architesh to talk about, because he has lots of experience from his PhD in working on the agriculture insurance. So he has done some work in the western part of Odisha during his PhD period. So later he basically after he joined Erie, he moved to the London school. Now he's in UNU EHS. So he is basically focusing mostly on the crop insurance. So I thought, okay, why not to bring some insights from the South Asia, Africa, because he has done some work in Africa, in Asian region. So what is the relevance of the crop insurance, and what we can learn from the other parts of the world? So how the crop insurance moving? Because if you look at that NSSO 2019, so hardly 9% farmers are adopting crop insurance. Although we have Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana we thought that it will boost the adoption of crop insurance program in India in 2016. So if you look at the 2013 NSSO, it was hardly 6%, and 2019 it was hardly 9%. That's less than 10%. So since that is not boost the adoption of crop insurance, so what should you do, and how you can boost the crop insurance is basically one of the risk mechanism. And also the last I will invite Professor Misra to talk about what are the institutional and financial mechanisms, basically formal and institutions and financial mechanisms, not not only the state perspective, but also country perspective, the international perspective, what the financing mechanism to promote various kind of adaptation measures, uh, different vulnerable region, particularly in the Western Odisha. So with this note, so may I request Professor Niranjan Ghosh to share his views, basically set the stage related to climate change, agriculture, and sustainable development goals. And let me mention that I think so he's also in the president. Apart from that, he's now I think holding the G20 presidency of the SEPRA. With this introduction, short introduction, let me welcome Professor Niranjan Ghosh to start.
Thank you. Thank you. A very good afternoon to all of you. And at the outset, let me thank. Am I audible? I presume I am audible, right? Okay. So let me thank Odisha Economic Association for agreeing to collaborate with the Indian Society for Ecological Economics for this very important panel. Let me thank Professor Keshav Das, President, Odisha Economic Association and Chair of this session, Sri Amarendra Das, and of course my colleagues in INSEAD, Dr. Chandrasekhar Bahinipati for taking up the onus of organizing this panel, and also Bhivu Prasad Naik. As such, I begin this talk with a heavy heart. I just got the devastating news prior to getting into this panel, the news of demise of Dr. Kingshuk Mitra, former president of erstwhile Windrock International India, who has been associated with INSEE ever since its early days. So some of the members, old members of INSEE might be recalling him. In any case, we have to move on with this. So as such, in fact, there has been extensive literature on climate change and agriculture. The implications are all pervasive across the agri-commodity value chain. And there is, no point reiterating that it affects the farm community, entailing the primary producers, intermediaries, and ending up with the consumers. Now, a few issues need to be noted here. Firstly, while we talk of the farm sector to the end consumer, we often tend to forget a more fundamental force of production, that is the natural ecosystem. Now, the cause of the natural ecosystem and the ecosystem services, or the services provided by the ecosystem through its very organic functioning, was recognized in the body of literature in classical political economy, but under a different nomenclature. They use the term land. However, as we progress towards neoclassical economics, which of course made things a bit more reductionist, land as a factor of production was pushed to the back burner. However, while environmental economics remained rooted in the reductionism of neoclassical economics, it needed a more heterodox framework of ecological economics to acknowledge the critical roles of ecosystem and its organic services in food production processes, and not only processes but also institutions. One element of this definitely occurs in the form of pure provisioning service of the ecosystem. And when I use the term provisioning service, this is as per the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which came out in 2005. So while I use the term pure provisioning service of the ecosystem, what I mean is food production, soil fertility, etc. And others are in the form of supporting services of the ecosystem, largely soil formation, primary production, and in certain cases, it is also in the form of regulating service of the ecosystem. Now, there are claims that climate change has brought about changes in the natural ecosystem, its structure and functions, and eventually the services. Therefore, when we talk about decay in soil quality or topsoil losses, changes in flow regimes, sediment movements associated with a particular flow regime of a river, all affect the most fundamental factor of food production, the natural ecosystem, or what the classical political economists called land. Now, let me bring in my second concern here. This is the problem of attribution. Just a few days back, in fact, a colleague who is a very cherished eco-hydrological scientist was making a presentation at the WWF Research Advisory Committee meeting. I am also a member of WWF's Research Advisory Committee, where he was talking in terms of certain invasive species, especially the flora, in the upper Kaveri Basin, causing changes in the hydrological flow regimes. Now, the contestation that emerged is with the attribution. Can the changes in the water and the sediment flow be attributed to invasive species or even to forces of global warming and climate change? Similarly, in certain cases of Indian agriculture, or even agriculture in large parts of the developing and the underdeveloped world, the extent of this change has been fully attributed to global warming and climate change, which again is not right. Now, groundwater depletion cannot entirely be attributed to climate change. Soil degradation and decline in soil productivity cannot entirely be attributed to climate change. Decline in surface water flows cannot entirely be attributed to climate change. Of course, climate change is a factor, but there are also, in fact, other forms of anthropogenic interventions beyond anthropogenic intervention causing climate change. So, third, taking cue from my second point, it needs to be remembered that what what we call extreme events, that is floods and droughts, these are integral components of the broader ecohydrological cycle, and especially, in fact, in this part of the world, in the subcontinent. Now, this is where the colonial engineering, this is something what the colonial engineering paradigm rather failed to understand and appreciate. But this was historically and traditionally understood by your farmers and the farm community. So, conventional reductionist engineering brought about engineering interventions by diverting rivers, canals, etc., so as to secure water for the dry season. Today, in large parts of the drier peninsular India, what we find is that there's a third crop of paddy, which is the summer paddy. And this is a water guzzler promoted through extensive intervention over hydrological flows through construction of dams, barrages, canal networks, etc., and making water available. And finally, and also through the support price mechanism and procurement mechanism that intentionally or inadvertently promote rice and wheat, especially during the dry season. So don't think that droughts, one should not rather take droughts as merely functions of climate change. But yes, if we take long-term data and find evidences of shifting monsoon or increasing frequency of droughts and floods, then there is a clear indication of climate change impacts. Fourthly, let me come to the SDGs. This is what Chandra has been mentioning. Now, SDGs have emerged as, I would say, the most complete statement on development in the history of development paradigm. And definitely, it's the limb of global development governance. As such, when we talk about SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals, we keep on reverberating what Sri Lankan economist Mohan Munasinghe put across in his framework of Sustainomics. The challenge of reconciling between the irreconcilable trinity of equity, efficiency, and sustainability. This is also because it embeds cross-cutting challenges as far as the SDGs are concerned. And as per traditional development thinking, often we will find that certain goals, many of these goals, are actually in conflict with each other and not in consonance. For example, decent work and economic growth can be in conflict with sustainable production and consumption, or even with other equity parameters. So pathways need to be found to reconcile between them. Climate change makes the challenge even more complex. So therefore, climate action has been taken as a separate goal. So every single goal, right from SDG 1 even till partnerships, that is SDG 17, has to endure the threat of climate change, whether it is food security or poverty. Now, because climate change, first of all, from the development practitioner's perspective or development economist's perspective, it is a developmental problem. From a strategic perspective, it is again a security problem. So it covers this gamut from development to security to conflict, and it is essentially present in every endeavor of human activity. Fifthly, let's talk of this neo-Malthusian creed, which associates conflicts over water with their relative or absolute scarcity. Now, the FAO classifies water scarcity into two classes: the physical water scarcity and economic water scarcity. Now, physical water scarcity manifests as severe environmental degradation, increasing occurrence of conflicts. So it's purely with the physical availability of water. On the other hand, the economic water scarcity is the result of lack of access to water rather than diminished physical availability. This is often due to a lack of investment in water infrastructure or inadequate infrastructure development, resulting in economic agents being deprived of water for economic use, which might be agriculture, industry, households, or whatever. But in any case, in this part of the world, 80% to 85% of the water is getting into agriculture. So we are highly susceptible to seasonal, annual, and long-term fluctuations. Uh, in contrast to this Malthusian creed of scarcity-inducing conflicts, which has been propounded by the FAO, we find another paradigm. That is the IWRM, that integrated water resource management, which in fact at a river basin scale finds a different nomenclature altogether, called the integrated river basin management. In both cases, they recognize the ecosystem as a critical stakeholder in the water demand matrix. So in order to combat both economic and physical scarcities, now supply augmentation plans emerged at till a point in time as a dominant paradigm. Now what has happened is, as far as India or large parts of South Asia or the developing world is concerned, we are still sticking to that colonial engineering paradigm of engineering the rivers. In fact, there was a very popular term which you will find if you go to the Central Water Commission. We have to train the rivers. So as if those are the wild animals whom you have to train. And that is why, in fact, in certain components in civil engineering departments, they also use the term wild rivers. So now this strategy focused exclusively on increasing interventions into the hydrological cycle somehow it's globally now is being regarded as counterproductive because of the adverse impacts on the basin ecosystem. And it also has impacts, in fact, in the long run on the entire flow regime, on ecosystem services provided by the flow regime, and including the quantity of water. So because of the river fragmentation itself, and many of the river conflicts, because I have been working extensively on rivers in this part of the world, on the Himalayan system, as also in some of the peninsular rivers as well, including the Kaveri. Most of the river conflicts have emerged because of the extensive intervention which essentially fragments the entire river system. Now, what we find in US and European Union right now, though in fact they were the ones who brought about this entire supply augmentation designs, ever since the 1990s, they started decommissioning dams. That is because of the higher cost that the society has to incur to maintain those defunct structures. So in that sense, scarcity is not merely a human economic issue, but can be a characteristic of the ecological sector, especially when your supply augmentation plans for meeting the unbridled human needs keep on fragmenting the river systems, impact the integrity of the basin ecosystem, cause irreparable damage to the ecosystem. On the other hand, affects the human system or the human society by, in some way or the other, reducing the provision of the ecosystem services. Now, since the issue of livelihoods, I think Professor Das mentioned about the livelihoods issue, we need to remember one thing, that ecosystems and livelihoods are inextricably linked with each other. One is the pure ecosystem service, which in fact, through the process of the various provisioning services, there are others because land by itself is acting as an input in the production process. And when the provision of that input keeps on diminishing, that also affects, suppose you keep on intervening, in fact, on the flow regimes with dams and barrages, the fish movement has been hampered. And this is prevalent in all parts of the world, including this part of the world, whether I talk of the Ganges, whether I talk of the Mahanadi, whether I talk of the Kaveri. So this is something, and that is affecting the fishermen communities to a large extent. And so the farm community gets affected, and the trade-off somehow needs to be understood here. Are we talking of growth versus ecosystem, or growth or the short run versus the long run? Now, the biggest withdrawals from the natural ecosystem has been happening, in fact, in the context of agriculture. And around 70 to 80%, at times 90%, in fact, that's what I find in this part of the world, water is getting into agriculture. And in many cases, water conflicts are not always functions of the physical scarcity of water, but they are functions of the temporal coincidence of demand based on scarcity value of water. And this is what I recall, was a model developed by me and Jayanto Bandyopadhyay published in the journal 2000, in Water Policy in 2009, which talked about that scarcity value. It's not physical scarcity of water that essentially leads to water conflicts, especially when we are talking about the agricultural uses of water, but it is the scarcity value of water which measures the magnitude of the loss or the marginal value loss due to scarcity of water. That is what we are defining as the scarcity value of water. So this is a metric of the degree of deprivation and creates the basis for water conflicts. Sixthly, it needs to be remembered that under IWRM, or Integrated Water Resource Management, there is a clear challenge to the water food nexus. Rather, the linear and the positive relation between water and food is a myth that has been taught by many, like Malin Falkenmark, and lately, in fact, in the Indian context, by Jayanto Bandyopadhyay, and of course, my own work in this domain. Now, let me just put this framework in the context of Odisha, and maybe, in fact, with Western Odisha, with some apparent facts. The resilience of a community to climate change is largely contingent upon asset and its poverty levels. But the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index 2022, despite the massive spurt in growth in Odisha because of industrialization, manufacturing growth, service sector growth, we still have, it's among one of the poorest states in the country. So, in fact, especially in Western Odisha, this becomes extremely prevalent. Uh, in the context, Bihar is the poorest state with 51.91% of the population, and Odisha's scenario is almost converges with that of Bihar. So, in fact, in a recent ongoing study at ORF of my organization, Observer Research Foundation, where I work, which explores poverty levels across 4 states in India, namely 4 districts rather: Bolangir in Orissa, Adoni in Andhra Pradesh, Radanpur in Gujarat, and Mandla in Madhya Pradesh. We are using the stages of progress methodology to look at poverty, and eventually asking the various focus groups, the who according to you is the poor, are poor. So naturally, they're coming up with various parameters. Now, what we find in Odisha is that it's some of the very basic parameters are being taken to define poverty, whereas in the context of many of the other states in West, as also in fact in the South, the parameters are way above the very basic levels. So this one can make out, and more so because of asset creation, the size of holding and the assets, those are also substantially small in this part of the world. And this is not actually a reflection of Odisha merely. This is also a reflection, in fact, in rural Bengal. We find this kind of a phenomenon. Now, 9 districts in Odisha faced severe droughts in the year 2018. Majority of the farmers who faced severe losses from Western Odisha, where the moisture stress in the district caused crop losses of at least 33%. Unprecedented southwest monsoon in 2015, at least 25 of the 30 districts in the state experienced drought. Now, definitely, this is a phenomenon which is to a certain extent restrains or constrains the adaptive capacity of that particular space. Now, a few issues. Let me just end here with, though in fact there have been some very interesting governmental interventions, but let me just emphasize here that these interventions are mostly in the form of subsidies, in the form of supports, but a few issues need to be considered here. Firstly, changes in cropping pattern should be incentivized. And I'm not talking of this from the perspective of Odisha only, but this is true, in fact, for most of the arid areas and the drier areas, where essentially large-scale water use has been happening for the water guzzlers, and where the enabling conditions of producing these water guzzlers don't exist. One is changes in cropping pattern should be incentivized by the state and the center by promoting less water consuming crops, by changing the terms of trade to higher support prices of drier crops, improvements of the value chain, and of course the governmental procurement mechanisms. Now, this came up in our recent research that ever since the 1980s till 2010, the movement of the minimum support prices has been in favor of rice and wheat as compared to the millets, which are, of course, which consume 1/5 of the amount of water, at times 1/8 of the amount of water of rice. Now, naturally, this minimum support prices started affecting the market prices, and eventually the acreage also shifted towards those crops which were much more remunerative. And eventually we find the third crop of paddy as well in large parts of peninsular India. So this reversal is important. Somehow it seems that this entire thinking has dawned even in the Commission on Agricultural Costs and Prices. And lately, in fact, for Rabi, there has been some kind of a reversal, and for even for the summer and the other crops, the prices of ragi and jowar have actually been increased at a higher proportion than that of paddy. This is, of course, I'm talking of the 2019-20 phenomenon. Now, as Chandra rightly mentioned, this has been a phenomenon all across, in fact, in India, that crop insurance penetration has largely failed. This, no doubt that this needs to be boosted further. Now, lately I talked of developing, in fact, not lately, rather from 2010, I have been talking about this, that we should try to develop more deeper instruments like the water derivatives markets that can act as insurance mechanism, not for the farmers as such, but for the broader farm community who can compensate the farmer in the process. Now, this will be in the form of futures markets for water, which will be participated by a large number of stakeholders. And this is not going to be in the way that California has done so far. It needs to be in a way as conceptualized in successive papers, in fact, lately by me. It should be a quantity-based index that should find its way in the futures market. Now, details of this instrument, that's a separate exercise which we have conducted so far, that shows that how in water scarce economies, like that of the Kaveri Basin or even the Mahanadi Basin, such instruments can reduce scarcity value of water, compensate the farm community for their losses, and help resolve water conflicts at all levels. The third issue is issue of adaptation financing and loss and damage financing. Now, here, in fact, because we have been talking about climate change, the issue is first of all is attribution. And if it can be attributed to climate change, and it is attributed to climate change, then in fact, we need to create that resilience ability from within the farm community. And for that, the first and foremost thing that is needed is adaptation financing, either in the form of accommodative infrastructure, in the form of better training, in the form of more and more capacity building programs, better seeds which are climate resilient in nature. But the issue remains vague, more so because the funding agencies so far have a bias towards funding mitigation projects than adaptation projects, including the Green Climate Fund. If you look at the Green Climate Fund, 72% of the funding has gone into mitigation projects, around 15% into adaptation projects, and around 13% into projects which are combinations of mitigation and adaptation. Now, COP27 has lately come up with the loss and damage financing approaches. But the biggest challenge in here is how do you value loss and damage? So that remains another issue in here, because whatever loss and damage has been happening in this part of the world, merely an annual estimation of that is not sufficient. If you are losing out on property, losing out on an ecosystem, losing out on human life, it is a loss in opportunity for the system as such. And that is for a phase of maybe 20 years or 30 years. Because to create this, to go back to the same old system, you might need 20 years, 30 years, or 40 years. So you need to have this approach of net present value for this mode of compensation. So better institutional mechanisms are needed. Project viability needs to be shown for private sector participation in here, especially for investment in regions like that of Western Odisha, which are highly vulnerable to climate change. So with that, I would like to pause here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Professor Niranjan Ghosh, for setting the stage with respect to climate change, agriculture, and SDG goals, and starting from the agriculture, then water issues, then talking about the river issues in different parts of India, and also cropping part and insurance. Then finally talk about the climate adaptation finance and the loss and damage. So I can accept at this stage only one question if you want to ask, which is you will forget it. If you want to ask only one question at the stage, I can allow. Anyone wants to ask only clarificatory question. If I have a big question, please keep it. Please remember it. If you want to ask any clarificatory question, not more than one. If anyone wants to ask, Okay, so please keep your question at the end. So I request Nilanjan to stay till the end. So now I jointly invite both Bibu Prasad, Dr. Bibu Prasad Gayak, as well as Dr. Jena should talk about. As you know that I don't think I should introduce Bibu because I think the crowd may know Bibu much better than me. So Bibu was present with the Terry, basically with the undergraduate with Terry. So now he was with TIS and he's working as an associate professor in Terry, Hyderabad. And similarly also Dr. Pradyut Jaina, who is also one of the INSEE executive, at present INSEE executive member, he is also working as an associate professor at NIT Surat. And both of them have done some work and they're also doing some work in the western Odisha and the southern part of Odisha, basically undivided KBK region from the funding from the ADP as well the JSK is funding both of them doing some work. So that's why I thought, okay, let me invite both of them to share their work jointly. So I'll give you max 20 to 25 minutes to present your work. So thank you. Now floor
Yeah.
is yours.
Thank you so much, Chandra. Thank you so much. Like I mean, all everybody who is here to listen to this discussion, this panel. Am I audible? Is my
Yeah, yeah, yes,
slide
yes,
visible? Yeah.
yeah.
So the yes, we'll be sticking to the time. We thought we will. I'll start with discussion, and then Pradyut will join. Pradyut is now currently traveling for a field work, so he has, like I mean, with limited access to the network, so he will join in some time soon. Then I'll, like I mean, if I'll be here till end for the discussion round in case he misses this. So this is an ongoing study that like I mean that we are trying to figure, that we are currently engaged in. We have another young colleague here, Mr. Purna Chandra Tanti, who is a doctoral researcher at NIT Suratkal. So he's also part of this ongoing work that we are trying to do. And Nilanjana set the stage for this, so that made this our task much easier given the limited time. So, like I mean, I'll be only talking about some of these ideas which had some implications in operationalizing a field-based research when it comes to understanding the adoption of climate smart agriculture practices by the farmers at the farm level. So the first is we need to differentiate between climate variability and climate change. Like I mean, in fact, the climate variability and the weather changing weather conditions. So people often use this temporal scale where the climate change is something which is considered as much long term change, whereas the kind of understanding that the farmers often have is around, like maybe the changing weather conditions or the climatic variability conditions. And this impact of the climate change, there are several models like at scales discussing the impact of the climate change. So one of the significant impact when it comes to agriculture is like its impact on the crop yield, and like particularly the developed like in the in fact the change is something which is like could be different across different regions globally. And also some of the changes in climatic variables like the temperature, rainfall patterns, change in water availability, and also the frequency and intensity of the extreme events is something which has significant impact on agriculture and allied sector. There has been several studies on this, again, like I mean, also more and more evidences are emerging with time. And also the agriculture and the allied activities like forestry, fisheries, livestock, they do contribute to these climate change phenomena in terms of contributing to the emissions, and like that are also several estimates globally and or also at different scales contributing to this. Like for instance, close to one fourth of the emissions.
People's slide is not moving.
Is it so?
Yeah, you're not moving the slide.
Just me stop sharing.
Can you
Yes. So
reshare it?
should I do this again? I don't
Yeah.
know how it works.
In fact, sometimes in Google Chrome this happens. So
Yeah.
to avoid this problem, what you can do is don't make it full screen. So without
Okay.
making full screen, you can continue your presentation and it will be visible.
Right. Right. Okay. So is it now visible again?
Yeah. Yeah. This fourth slide is visible.
Right, right. So then I'm not making full screen. Yeah. Thank you, Amarendra. Yeah. So like I'm that contributing to 1/4 of the total emissions on this, and this again like this change, this climate change is going to impact the life and livelihoods of people in many different ways. But some of the concerns regarding the agriculture is the first, like if it will affect the food production system, and like then probably that will be a like a dual challenge. Like we need to increase uh, 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 the agricultural production to meet the increased population. Some estimates, and this is like suggest that by 2050 the world population will be around 9 billion, which is like 34% higher than the current level of population, and we need to enhance agricultural production by 60% by that time to increase the demand. So this is like the challenge that the world as a whole, and also different regions are facing. And the evidence of these change is there has been several evidences, or like estimates of these impact. Like for instance, a recent report on India suggests that like India lost around 5.4% of its GDP due to these extreme heat conditions in 2021, and also like these extreme events has resulted in significant loss of agricultural production and of course to the farmers. Yes. So these climate smart agriculture practices is something which are being advocated as one of the ways to address these concerns. And this is something which is going to affect the farmers in the developing countries. That's because of their vulnerability due to the limited adaptive capacity, which I think like we were talking about, that Nilanjan was talking about. And then also this is something which will be which another challenge is this specific, the climate change or the impact of this change will be a double burden on agriculture systems which is already struggling, or something which is yet to achieve the transformation that we have been the world has been talking about since last several decades, right? Like if you want to if you would like to locate this discussion in the context of the Western Odisha, or in fact, like several similar regions, in fact, applies to other parts of Odisha as well. Like some of these characteristics which is, we read that in the textbook and also discussions, like majority of the farmers are small farmers, like are into subsistence farming practices, have limited access to credit and other inputs. They have limited access to technologies, something which results in low productivity. Also, have very limited access for the formal market and also storage facilities, so make them more vulnerable to the price fluctuations, or more vulnerable to the market conditions. So this is something again like results in a situation where the farmers become remain poor, and again like the same cycle continues. And this is like this climate change, for instance, is going to be like another challenge or additional challenge along with the existing challenges that we do have. And also many of these experiences of climate change or experiences of extreme events is something which is not new to the region that we are talking about, be it the global south, the developing country context, or even the regions that we would like to focus on, like droughts, dry spells, cyclones, pest and diseases is something which has been the case. Like one report, for instance, suggests that in last 105 years, there is some and other kinds of disasters for close to 95 years. Like for instance, close to 50 years, like there was some experience of some flood. Around 32 years, there are experience of droughts, and like of course cyclones are our, like I mean, cyclones love us, right? For the kind of geographical location that we are in. So what is also important to understand, that the climate smart agriculture technologies that we are talking about also need to be region specific, need to factor this in mind. So this idea of climate smart agriculture is something which was like coined by FAO in 2010, and this is something which is not a new agricultural system or like technologies or practices. It's something like putting together some of the existing technologies and practices to address like the concerns of food security and adaptation to the climate change. And as we have already discussed, it has implications to several sustainable development goals. And these climate smart agriculture like has multiple like has the potential for multiple gains. Like for instance, it may help the farmers and the communities or the countries to help increasing the agricultural productivity and also income for the farmers. It also helps reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from the farming from the agriculture sector, and it also help adapting and building resilience to the climate change that probably like that's happening, that's affecting the life and livelihoods of people across the country. And these there are like several elements of this climate smart agriculture system. Like it involves climate smart crop production, climate smart livestock production, climate smart forestry, and also the kind of practices that you bring in for the soil and land management, water management, and also these integrated production systems, and like all other elements that we have. And also, these change is something, when we were talking about the adoption of these practices or technologies, we also need to keep in mind that the climate smart agriculture is a complex of the policies, institutions, and practices. It's not something like I mean, this is how it like maybe this is different from the existing like other kinds of technologies or the adoption issues that usually we tries to study. So there are like different approaches for this. Like for instance, one of the key elements of climate smart agriculture involves expanding the evidence base around how, for instance, the change is impacting and how different kind of practices can help minimizing the impact of those changes. It also is about supporting and enabling the policy framework. It's also about strengthening the national and local institutions, which can help these adoption in many different ways. And also one of the key options is another one of the key element is enhancing the financing options. And of course, as I said, it's a complex of policy institutions and practices. Implementing these practices at field level is another bigger challenge. So there has been several studies on this, and the adaptation to climate change is also considered as one of the pillars of this climate smart agriculture, where people try to argue that these adaptation help to increase the productivity and income. And the adaptive capacity of the farmers of the communities is also an important factor which determines the action of adaptation among the farmers. There are two kinds of adaptation that people talk about. One is the autonomous, which is like where the adaptation activities undertaken by individuals and private organizations, and the planned adaptation, which is mostly by the government agencies there. And the farmers' perception do impact the adaptation options and also the adoption practices of the farmers. And there are literature talks about different elements or different dimensions of these perceptions around awareness, understanding, and experience. So the farmers having more like understanding, awareness, and experience are like more reliably perceive the climate change, and also are more likely to respond to those changes. And when you're talking about this, we do recognize that farmers are active observers and also respond to the change. Like it's not that they respond to the change only after we like I mean we the government or the science tells them to change. They do observe these changes and also respond to these changes. And there has been several studies which finds this positive correlation between the perception and also the larger trained of the meteorological data. That's already there. There is some kind of convergence are there, and also studies also suggest, empirical studies again suggest that farmer perceptions are aligning with meteorological records, like of different regions, and there are also cases of where there are like often there are odds. So it's also important to analyze these meteorological records and the perceptions to obtain more accurate results. So in this specific study, we are trying to understand the perceptions and also trying to see like how it matches the meteorological records that are available, and also trying to understand different socio-economic and social factors that influence adoption of CSA practices by the farmers. Yeah, so I think now I'll request Pradyut to take over.
Yeah, uh, sure. Thank you very much, Bibu. Thank you, actually. Thank you, first of all, to the organizers, Odisha Economic Association, and Chandra for initiating for this panel. So, as Bibu already, and in fact, before that, I actually have been in this for a while, last 20 minutes, I guess. So I heard a bit of Dr. Nilanjan's speech as well, so and Bibu's as well. So I guess they have already given the broad, framework and background and the context against which we are talking here. So I'm left to do the field uh, study results. So, which I don't know whether it is nice or not, but we've already said about our project, which is funded by JSPS and also ICSSR. So we worked in many districts. Balangir is one of them, which is the focus of today's geographical, context, Western Odisha. But we also worked in coastal districts like Kendrapada and Mayurbhanj, Koraput, and so on. Yes, Purna, who is present here today, he has helped. He has been the part of the active part of the project. Purna Tanti. He is a doctoral scholar who is about to submit his thesis, and in fact, he has personally administered the questionnaire. So, all right. Bibu, are you sharing this part of the thing, or
Yes,
can
yes,
you?
I'll run the slides.
No, I may have changed a bit. Can you just
Oh,
stop it? I will do it.
okay, thank you. Yeah, you may go ahead.
Just a second. Share. Oh, okay. Okay, maybe you do that, please. I'm not finding that sharing button actually.
Here
Bibu,
it is
can you
present
share it?
now. Here it is present now. Just
Yeah,
select the arrow button.
arrow.
Yeah, there is
This one.
arrow. In the extreme right now you find that red.
Oh, entire screen. Yeah, that's the one, right?
Yes, yes. Entire
Yes.
screen and then yes.
Yeah. Got it. Sorry. Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah. Is it coming now?
Yes. Coming on the yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thanks. Sorry for the inconvenience. Yeah. So, Balangir district, where this what I'm going to talk for next few minutes. So we did there some household survey as well as yeah, we did both the face-to-face household survey as well as some focus group discussions with groups of respondents, farmers mostly, and also some face-to-face interviews with agricultural extension officers at different levels, like district agriculture officer and village level agriculture officer as well, and Krushak Sathi. So three different levels we did this data collection. Balangir, a little bit about it. As you know, it falls under the Western Central Tableland agroclimatic zone. So dry, arid, hot and humid weather, and very small percentage of irrigation, about 11% in Kharif and 5% in Rabi. So obviously it's chronically drought prone. I think Bibu has already said last 100 years we have many prevalence of drought. So 13 times in last 3 decades. Okay, major crops are paddy and cotton, pulses and oil seeds to some extent also. Cotton is the main cash crop. Okay, so that is basically the context here. What we did is in this study is actually we studied the climate smart agriculture. I think I don't need to go into it. Bihu has already spoken about climate smart. What is climate smart? This is a term coined by FAO, but as he said, it is nothing new that FAO has started. FAO has actually put it in under a banner, kind of umbrella term like climate smart agriculture, which has triple wins. Okay, productivity increase, adaptation to climate change, and mitigation. But these kind of practices have been discussed earlier as well. Some of the CGIAR in particular, where I worked for 3 years in CIMIT, that is International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center in Nairobi. CGIAR is a consortium of 17 organizations, international organizations, which work different aspects of agriculture. So these practices have been in part promoted by the researchers of those organizations. Apart from that, our in India, the agricultural research has been phenomenally done well over the years, ever since the Green Revolution. So all these practices have been known to people, farmers also, but we are talking in a way that it would look convenient, climate smart, so it sounds smart. So the thing is that there are many practices coming under it. We when we were trying to when we were making questionnaire, actually we were a bit confused as to which ones to consider. Okay, because there are so many practices and some of them are overlapping in their scope. But considering the conditions of the study region and in discussion with some of the experts, we came up with these 6 practices to focus in this study. Risk scheduling planting, which is quite relevant given the climate change induced erratic weather. So the rainfall or the rainy season sometimes starts late, and rain start late and so on. So given that, rescheduling planting is quite important. Okay, crop rotation, as you know, it would enhance the soil nutrient. Crop diversification, soil conservation. The fifth one is DRS seed, that is drought resistant seed. So some of the high yielding varieties are actually to some extent drought resistant also. And last one is agroforestry. So we asked, this sample is of 450 samples done in a random walk manner. So it's not fully random sample, but it's a multi-stage sampling we did. Okay, the first ones, like choosing the blocks of the districts, are basically convenience sampling. so which are more vulnerable according to the district level statistics. The blocks which are more vulnerable or have faced more droughts or have been very poor harvest. So we chose those blocks intentionally, but within the blocks we sort of made a near random sample, and we asked whether farmers have adapted such adaptation practices which we call climate smart practices. So we got that rescheduling, planting, crop rotation and crop diversification, these three in particular have been very well developed or well known in the region. As you can see the statistics, 75% rescheduling, 62 crop rotation and 56 for crop diversification. So these practices have been adopted, whereas some others like drought resistant seed or soil conservation or agroforestry, these are not so much, so below 25%. Okay, soil conservation is something which is very important. I think others have already spoken about it, and Indian government also launched the soil testing program since 2016. But just like crop insurance, this is also has not been very successful so far due to various reasons. And here also, Bibu was talking about whether the people's perception or farmers' perception regarding climate change is actually in sync with the actual data of temperature and rainfall that we observe. So we also tried to see that here, and we saw that this is the temperature data from 1993 to 2018 in Balangir. And yeah, of course, when you plot temperature data, you would see a very narrow kind of change, because due to the scale. But we saw that there is an increase in temperature in actual data, and of course perception to increase temperature, we have a very high percentage. Similarly, about rainfall, there is a high percentage people who said that they perceive that the rainfall is decreasing. And actual data also, we see a mean or average decline in rainfall. So it's not fully, but there is some positive correlation between what people perceive and what actual data is. So they do perceive the climate, but the question is whether they really link it in their adoption practices. So does that reflect, does that perception reflect in their actual action? That's a question, not a very easy question though to answer. But let me go ahead with the results. Here we did a multivariate probit model. So I guess many of you would know, those who know econometrics, multivariate probit model is a very effective method wherein when you have these practices that we took as dependent variables, typical econometrics language. So dependent variables, when a host of independent variables affect the different dependent variables, in that case we suspect some correlation. So instead of doing these regressions separately, we can do it together. That there is a assumption that the joint distribution of the error term of all these together is normal. So the multivariate probit model gives us a glimpse of what we observed there. Here you can see the variables. We tried to categorize them. The first slide, in this slide here, we have the institutional factors as such, like government extension, access to government extension. So these are dummy variables, meaning yes and no kind of response. So machinery subsidies, whether they have received it or not, seed subsidies, and those who have received, they are positively associated with adopting one or multiple of these adoption practice, climate smart practices. You can see that, for example, those who have received government extension, they have been doing or adopting 5 of the 6 that we have taken. Similar with seed subsidy and so on. Here we show the perception variables: increased temperature, decreased rainfall. So like I said, although we got positive association here, meaning that those who have perceived temperature rising or rainfall declining or drought and flood happening quite quite frequently, they are the ones who are adopting more. So that is the econometric result. But I would like to bring this, that this should not be taken very much strongly. We have to have the cautions that like perceptions and actual action, there may not be, it might we might get it here positive association, but it might not be that way. Okay, people do rescheduling, planting, for example, or crop rotation, but not against these perceptions. They do it because of various other reasons, sometimes that they get subsidy. And rather, I would say the agriculture extension and subsidies are more dominant role there. Distance to extension office, that's an interesting variable. It has come negative. As you can see, that higher the distance, they are less likely to adopt. So it goes along the other result, that extension has a very dominant role there, inducing people to adopt these practices. So yes, these are the same thing. Then I go to the impact. Like we said, that we examine both the determinants or the factors that influence farmers to adopt such practices, and what is the impact of it. What Chandra was also telling, I guess, that there are very less studies. Indeed, there are very less studies on the impact in India. What is the impact of it? uh, the impact parameters could be of two types. Let's say one is economic impacts, that is on yield and income, which we looked at. But there are also social impacts. One could say poverty, impact on poverty, impact on food security or inequality, or even gender parity within the families, or education. So those are social outcome variables which one can take, which we haven't. But I would strongly say that maybe in future we will attempt that, and others can do so too. So here we looked at the impact on yield and the agricultural income, net agricultural income. Yield is per acre. We used a very standard impact evaluation method, which I guess most people, those who are aware of impact evaluation literature, would know: propensity score matching. Uh, it's again an econometrics technique where impact evaluation. What is most important is to find two groups which are very popularly known as treatment and control groups. And treatment and control groups are very easy to find when you administer a randomized control trial, RCT. That is why RCTs are so popular. But these kind of studies which we do, which are surveys, which are non-random, as I said, our sample was not fully random, it was multi-stage. So when you have non-random kind of sample, okay, there, telling a person as a treated or control is very difficult. Okay, because of several econometric problems like self-selection and endogeneity and so on. So propensity score matching is advocated as a method. What it does is it calculates propensity or probability of a person falling under either treatment or control group, conditioned on the variables, conditions on the factors that have that may play a role in their choosing. So those propensity scores, that really, then we match the propensities. So those probabilities, there is a threshold of zero point 0.5. All those who have more than zero point 0.5, they are they will be considered as treated, and those who would be less than zero point 0.5 will be in control.
Sorry for the interruption, Radhat, because paucity of time. Can you finish it within 2 minutes?
I can finish in 1 minute.
Okay, 2 minutes. Okay.
No, the thing is that because it's nothing to go into detail, but the result shows that in some cases, for some of the six practices we took, so some cases there is a positive effect on yield and income. In some cases there is not, but yeah, impact, as I said, is not fully. Impact is something that as a you cannot get a clear cut picture of impact. It depends very much, and it's actually impacted by the heterogeneity. So even within the farmers, those who adopt, there are different conditions which affect the impact. So but for some of the practices, we got positive impact on yield and agriculture income. So yeah, final, this is my last slide. Some of these recommendations could be very simplistic, but they are still lacking, as we know that, for example, the watershed program is a very important one for the semi, the dry and arid regions like Balangir, okay, where the irrigation, as we saw, that the irrigation is only 10-11%. So watershed programs would go a long way in helping farmers. Those who are even willing farmers, they don't go for such because of the lack of irrigation. So that would really go a long way. Integrated farming together with animal husbandry can be also both crop and livestock kind of system, agriculture system would be quite good. So, and access to market, so that's also another important thing. Even if people would like to go for crop diversification or different other crops, just like Dr. Nilanjan was saying, that millet is a very important crop which should be promoted. So market access is very important. Not only the government procurement, but also the other kind of markets should also develop for such kind of practices to be really popular among farmers. Thank you very much.
So thank you both, Vibhu, and thank you, Dr. Jena. So now, so before I invite Architesh Panda to speak on crop insurance, since the Niranjan wants to leave at 4:40 because he's having another meeting at 4:45. So if you have any question to ask him, so I'll give the 5 minutes basically to ask, and then otherwise I'll go to Architesh Panda. So you have any question to ask Niranjan? Amit?
No, I think
It's not audible.
Mr. Maji has raised hand.
Okay,
Muralidhar
Mr.
also.
Maji, yeah, please.
Sir, Namaste, sir. I am from the district of Sambalpur. Actually, I am a resident professor of GM University, Sambalpur, from the Department of Economics.
Yeah, please ask your question.
Okay. First of all, I will say thank to the presenter of the
Yeah.
paper, and one word that he was using during his presentation, that is climate smart agriculture. Particularly,
Excuse me, actually,
No, it's a for
sorry,
Nilanjan
Dr.
Ghosh.
Maji, you have to ask Professor Nilanjan Ghosh now. He has to leave. This question you can ask towards the end of the event.
End of the, okay.
Yeah, please.
So anyone? Yeah, Sarvanaran Mishra? Yeah, please.
Actually, that was a marvelous presentation by Professor Nilanjan.
that I can
Yeah.
ask.
Maji, can you just wait? Yeah, Niranjan,
Yes, sir. Yes,
Sarvanaran Mishra,
no
please
problem.
wait.
No problem, sir. Okay, I will wait.
Actually, Sarah has narrated nicely the interventions, the need of shifting the interventions from subsidy based to incentivize change, means cropping pattern to be incentivized, change in cropping pattern to be incentivized and to be towards the climate smart. So just my specific question to sir. Is there any suggestions to the policy planners for agriculture for Odisha? Because the Odisha government has already started massively the Odisha millet mission. So millet, Sarah has also narrated nicely that yes, millets consume 1/5 of water requirement, and it is a futuristic crop The government has already taken a step, and that is widely acclaimed. And also the towards the suppose change in the cropping patterns from rice to diversification towards non-paddy high-value crops, or even towards towards off-farm activities or allied activities like livestock, the fisheries, and the poultry, etc. So it is just for this for Niranjan sir.
Okay, so let us collect all the questions so we can answer all the questions together. Any other question? Yeah, Maji, you want to ask anything to Person Niranjan first?
Sir, actually, after raising of paddy crops in a year, the rest of the 8 months in a year, our most percentage of our people, they remain jobless. So there is only one option, that is the livestock breeding. And now, what is the scenario in the most part of Balangir, parts of Sonpur, and parts of Sambalpur, and this western part is that, sir, that the indigenous varieties of goat and cows, these are going to vanish from different villages. Now, my question is, can there be any suggestion regarding this part of extension of agricultural activities relating to livestock production, so that it will be very congenial for this climate change, so that it can enhance their income and it can be sustainable also?
So any other question? Okay, I have a question. Professor Das, you have any question? Okay. So I have a question because you have raised the point like loss and damage finance and climate finance. Okay. And in the sometime you mentioned about that. Okay, we are not estimating the loss and damages properly. So I have written a paper on that. So because see, we are mentioning that okay, whether we should. I don't think it's necessary that we should put everything in the monetary term. And you know that okay, the problem with that at the international forum, we don't have a loss and damage definition. That which each country should follow and adopt. We don't have definition, forget about the methodology. And we are still adopting the ECLAC methodology of the disaster management discourse. And based on that, we have designed a PDNA approach. Okay, within the PDNA approach, we have basically tested that with basically rapid disasters like cyclone and flood, not with the basically small disasters like heat wave, drought, other kind of disasters. Even with the rapid disasters, looking at the non-economic goods and services, okay, and hardly we consider, except the provisioning services, hardly we consider the other services in that basket of estimating. So sometimes we recognize, but we don't consider, and sometimes we don't recognize also. And given that, so whether it's necessary to put everything in the monetary terms, because at the world negotiation they need in monetary terms, because to have a compensation, because this year we have put a loss and damage fund to the most vulnerable countries. I don't know, India fall under the category of the most vulnerable countries. Suppose we fall in the most vulnerable countries, whether at one level also we need a monetary terms to negotiate, but I don't know that whether we can put everything in the monetary terms. Okay, and the second thing that we have a climate finance. Okay, we have adaptation, we have a loss and damage, mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage. There are three pillars. Okay, and but so there are overlapping the activities with respect to mitigation, with respect to adaptation and loss and damage. So all of them are overlapping. Okay, so how can you differentiate the funding amount? Okay, that okay, this is a climate mitigation fund, this is the adaptation fund, this is a loss and damage fund. But when the activities are same, and similarly, what is happening if you look at the reports of the state governments? You have agriculture department, you have different departments. They publish their own report. They consider the word climate change in terms of agriculture. When the disaster management revenue department, they publish the state action plan on climate change agriculture. They also publish and they consider the agriculture and other sectors. Okay, so everyone is looking at the same objective, but they're not coming together. Okay, so everyone is looking for the same objective, but they are not actually coming together. They are the separate departments. This guy has the separate budget and that guy has a separate budget, but objective is the same.
Okay, let me come to Chandra first, then Dr. Mishra, and then Dr. Maji. So it's a very important question and very German concern that you have raised, Chandra. Now, let me put this in perspective. One is the mitigation component. Mitigation component, or what the way, in fact, we have been defining green transition. Let's use this term. Green transition has been defined only through the lens of energy transition, right? So this part can be distinguished from adaptation. Now, when we are talking about net zero or whatever, the whatever jargons we use out there, it's very clearly that so much of carbon. So there is a carbon equivalent aspect of things. When it comes to adaptation, we can, and the loss and damage, I completely agree with you that there is a possibility of getting things mixed. To what do we adapt? Adapt to the change. What change? We are actually, the change is being caused through the loss and damage only, right? So are we really adapting to, so how do we distinguish between the two? The issue is that the first of all, adaptation in that sense has to be defined in terms of the resilience. That is, how do we go back, right, to the same state or better off? Now I give you an example. Till 2014-15, adaptation meant in situ adaptation. That it means you are sitting there. There are forces of global warming and climate change, and you are adapting to it. How are you adapting to it? Through, suppose, accommodative infrastructure, through some other means, through creating, suppose, embankments, so on and so forth, right? Or raising up your house if you are in the coastal zone, so that even if there is salinity ingression or the saline water ingression, you are safe from that. Over time now, the entire connotation of adaptation is changing. It's no more in situ adaptation. Even uh, the notion of strategic and managed retreat of population from the vulnerable region is being counted as adaptation. And there's a plethora of literature on strategic retreat and experiments as well. There are some successful experiments. There are some certain experiments which have literally failed. I mean, some success stories you find in Chile, some failure stories. In fact, this has been, Odisha has been the only state in India which has tried out strategic retreat to a certain extent. I mean, they were the only state which had the guts actually to try out strategic retreat. I mean, thanks to the leadership, the political leadership. Because in fact, when we had been advocating strategic retreat in Maharashtra, as also from the parts of Sundarbans in West Bengal, the political leadership was not only apprehensive, they essentially said that we can't ask people to move out. That's their ancestral place. अरे भाई क्या होगा ancestral place में when this place is not going to be there by 2030? Precisely because you need, some long-term vision of 15 years, 20 years, 30 years to combat climate change. But the political dispensations in most part of the world, at least most parts of India and the developing world, excluding, I would appreciate, Odisha, they don't look beyond 5 years. Is this constituency there for me after 5 years? Are they going to vote for me? If I ask them to move out, they're going to move out to some other constituency. Why should I think for 15 years? Let me think for 5 years. This is the whole problem now. So the language of adaptation is also changing. Now, to distinguish between loss and damage and adaptation, it indeed is a challenge. Challenge in the sense that, fine, if we create some proper delineations and create that a straitjacket compartmentalization of adaptation and loss and damage, then in fact we have to get into the entire estimation process. Now, adaptation is incremental change, loss and damage is compensation. That is how, in fact, we have to look at things. Well, in practice, how do we do it? The challenge begins now when the L&D finance fund or L&D funding has actually been set up. Till now, we don't know what is going to be the institutional process of loss and damage. That also needs to be debated, delineated, better defined, and finally we form an institutional process out of this. Now let me come to the estimation component of things. No, everything cannot be put across as a monetary value. I completely agree with that. Especially suppose when we are talking about the cultural values, say. But to a certain extent, well, a sacred grove is lost. How do I compensate monetarily for that? This is something like a religious or a spiritual value involved in the process. But yes, to a certain extent, I can compensate for all those values to which somehow there is a concomitant market exchange process. Suppose, say, when I talk about the regulating service of the ecosystem, suppose this particular ecosystem was there, the mangrove ecosystem is there, right? The mangrove ecosystem might get destroyed over time to whatever reasons. Then the entire carbon sink, first of all, there is a carbon, stocked carbon, which is historically stocked out there. Second is the annual sequestration process that keeps on happening every year. So apart from the provisioning service, can't I put a value through the social cost of carbon, SCC, which for India right now is, say, in 2022 is $56 per ton. If you take the total CO2, is $84 per ton. Somehow, in fact, this is undervalued in the Indian context, and more so because if you keep on following the voluntary markets. So that is, of course, because that market mechanism somehow cannot actually look at what we call the intrinsic or the use value of the resource. It's primarily looking at the exchange value. So secondly, can't I look at some other values, say, what is its value in terms of pollution control? What is its value in terms of, say, soil formation? So these values can be imputed, and probably these values should be monetized and should be compensated to the affected community. But yes, this is only tip of the iceberg that we can touch. We cannot touch for spiritual, religious, sentimental, bequest, and other forms of values. Let me come to Dr. Mishra. Very interesting intervention. Yes, Mission Millet has been taken up. In fact, that is also a national project, as also a state project in Odisha and many parts, in fact, in many other states in the south as well. Definitely, we have to promote that. Now, there are 2-3 ways of doing it. One is definitely the price signal. Now, how do we create this price signal? See, what has happened is, since I had for 8 years, in fact, I was the chief economist of a commodity exchange from 2007 to 2014. And in some way or the other, I found that for all those commodities where a minimum support price exists and government procurement exists, the volume, in fact, in the exchange is substantially low. And that is primarily because of for rice and wheat. That is because the MSP is already acting as a hedging mechanism. It's a deeper hedging instrument, deeper than the futures. It's an option. If the market price goes below the minimum support price, you can always sell it to the government at the minimum support price. So that option is always there. Now, minimum support price in the process has acted as some kind of a base price for those commodities where government procurement happens. So if you go to this is something that I witnessed, in fact, in many of the mandis that I visited at that point in time, that in the mandis itself, they were having forward trading. I might get into a negotiation, some kind of an agreement with you today, that tomorrow it's going to be, tomorrow MSP is going to be, say, declared, and day after you have to sell the wheat to me at MSP plus 50. Whatever is the MSP. I'm not going to buy it from you at MSP minus 50, because you are not going to sell it to me at MSP minus 50. Right? Because you have the option in a more informative market. Of course, this information often is missing. We live in a world of asymmetric information. Now that is improving with the DPIs, or digital public infrastructure. So what happens is, over time, we found that the minimum support price often turns out to be the floor price in the formal market. So the government kept on increasing the minimum support price, and the market prices actually moved even above the minimum support prices. So the minimum support price turned out to be a determinant of market prices on many such certain commodities. So here also, if we create some kind of a linkage, like which I think was mentioning, Pratyut was mentioning, that MSP, we raise the MSP regime of the drier crops vis-a-vis the MSP regime of rice and wheat, and move the terms of trade to the drier crops, say ragi, towards ragi, or suppose other millets. Eventually, what we find is that there will be a lagged effect on the acreage. Farmers are going to take the decision on the basis of that. And once we do that, there will be a movement slowly and steadily towards the millet acreage. And of course, the price signal is not the only thing. You have to think of, in fact, capacity building programs. You have to think of more information to the farmers, and eventually, training programs and other things which agricultural universities need to do with the millets. So, remunerative price, capacity building programs, lessons in sustainability and other things, sustainable resource use. These are some of the critical elements, and in fact, Odisha is already doing that. I know that.
Sorry for the
Uh,
interruption. You have only 1 minute to finish.
yeah. So, Mr. Maji, I don't have any such intervention for you as such, because I agree with that. And probably the response that I gave to Mr. Mishra answers partially your concern as well, that we have to create alternative remunerative processes for the farmers. So whether it's in the form of millets or in the form of livestock and others. But remember one thing, that livestock by itself is not only a water guzzler, but also a carbon emitter. That is also something that we need to take into consideration.
Now, what I was asking is that region-specific suggestions.
So this is
keep
a
it up to the
region-specific
end.
suggestion. So
Please
we
keep
will
it
come
up
to
to
that.
the
You
end.
can send
Okay.
across, you
Yeah.
can send across an email to me. We can discuss this later. I think because
So
the
we
next
have
speaker is also waiting.
we have less time to cover other speakers. Okay, thank you, Professor Nilanjan. So we'll have you touch on the other events.
Thank you, Professor Das. Thank you, Professor
Thank you.
Mahindraji.
Thank you, Professor Nilanjan. Very nice, sir.
So without delay, let me invite Architesh Panda. Sorry for the basically time I put in the 4 o'clock. It's already half an hour delay, more than half an hour delay. Sorry from my side. It's early morning for you. Okay, and so you are earlier with Aija, then moved to ERI, then with London School of Economics, now with the UNHS working with the Minicredit for insurance. If I'm not wrong, so that I've invited to talk about more on the insurance, which is basically less adapted, mostly many parts of India, and taking the evidences from Africa and other countries. Yeah, now floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chandra, and it's a privilege to be here today. And I think almost all aspect has been covered by the earlier presenters already, like the field work from the Western Odisha, which was really interesting, and also on we have already discussed on managed retreat from the coastal belt of Odisha. We already discussed on loss and damage aspects in this on the whole session now. So I will not take much of your time, and what I'm going to focus today is on climate risk finance, broadly at the global level, but we also try to discuss what's happening at the Western Odisha level. As also I did some work. My PhD work was basically in Western Odisha and Balangir and Mapla district, so I can reflect a little bit on that. So let me share my screen if it's okay. Can you see my screen now?
No.
Now?
Not yet.
Give me a second.
Please select present now and share the entire screen.
Yeah, just I'm not used to this Google Meet, so give me a sec. Yeah, okay. No, let me check. Google Chrome might not be have screen recording permission on your computer.
Okay, otherwise you just share to me, just email to me, and you speak, and in between I'll share it. Okay, just put email to me.
Sorry for the technical glitch.
Just put an email to me, just share with me, and I can share from my side. Okay, I will start speaking.
Okay, so let me find. In the meantime, let me speak about it. So basically, what we discussed, I was going to discuss is on climate change and sustainable development goals in Western Odisha, but it's very hard to say without this. Let me send. I'm sorry for this.
So you have emailed to me?
Yes, it's going now.
Okay, you start speaking. In between I'll just download it.
Give me a sec. Did you receive it?
No, you start speaking. In between I'll download it and upload it.
Yeah, the thing is, I can't start without this. Okay, so let me anyhow manage without the slate. If Chandra you receive, just let me know.
Yeah.
I sent you. So we talked about we are talking about the sustainable development goals today in the whole session, and I was going to talk on climate finance and risk insurance. And sorry for this technical glitch. And we all know that Dr. Niranjan Ghosh just before this told about the net zero target in the climate change sphere, and we are already in the red zone, and we are all rushing towards the target of reaching the net zero target by the mid of the century to reduce the emission from the greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. And Paris Agreement, as we all know, it's one of the most important agreement that has taken place, and we are all trying to build towards that by reducing greenhouse
So
gases.
it's in which file? It's in Excel, PPT?
Uh, it's in Keynote.
Oh, which I don't have. That's the major issue. So you have to speak without PPT. Okay. So you look at the PPT and speak because that software I don't have. We don't have, I think. So that's why it's also not opening for me. Sorry for this.
No, it's fine. It's
Okay.
fine.
Okay, you can speak. Look at the PPT and speak, please.
Hmm. I don't know why you are not able to share it. Some...
I shared with the Chandra, but I think it's a different format. So
It's
yeah,
a different format, not in
No, no,
PPT.
no, no. I was just telling like why directly why you are not able to share. Like, what is the issue?
it's saying something that we are not allowed here. Give me one more try.
I think Architas, maybe you keep speaking and
Yeah,
that'll be,
please speak.
yeah,
Okay.
I think you just look at your PPT and
Yeah,
speak.
maybe
Yeah, I know at times it's very difficult, but maybe it's a challenge for
Yeah,
you.
so let me start with this. So we all know that we just released the Sustainable Development Goal, Sustainable Development report last year in India. And if you have a look at this Sustainable Development report, you can see that Odisha is performing really well in terms of many indicators, especially in terms of climate action and all other things. But there are few certain areas like the number of population, those who are living below poverty line, which is still 32% in Odisha. And as we all know that most of them are concentrated only in most of the time they are concentrated in the western part of Odisha, which we are discussing today, that why Western Odisha is kind of neglected from the scene, and why the poverty is so high in this region. And apart from that, also in terms of quality of education, crime against women, decent work, and also it was surprising for me to see that there has been a decrease in the men group cover in Odisha in the last 2 years. Although we have been telling that coastal protection policy has been one of the major focus for the state in the last decade, it was surprising for me to see the sustainable development goal document and find that the men group cover has really decreased in the last 2 years. So these are the few areas where Odisha has really underperformed in terms of sustainable development goals. And when you look at the when we compare the Western Odisha and the coastal Odisha, we all know that there has been kind of comfort in the coastal Odisha in terms of economic development, as the capital is also there, and good economic development is taking place in few districts, but as compared to the Western Odisha, where like districts like Kalahandi, Balangir, Koraput, and few other districts are still struggling with the poverty issue there to a large extent, as also was presented by my earlier presenters, and they have told that they mentioned that there are a lot of kind of adaptation that is going on in the place. I was also bit surprised to find not to find crop insurance and livestock management as adaptation measures, which was also questioned later, but they might have something on that, but they can just come in later. So it was interesting to see how people are adapting to climate change in Western Odisha. But on the other hand, if you look at the whole scenario that's going on in Odisha now, we have been in the mind that Odisha has one of the most successful state in terms of disaster management. We know that, and it's also globally recognized by the people all over the world. And in terms of cyclone management, in the last 2 decades, we have reached from almost 1 million deaths to a zero causality approach, which Odisha has been taking steps in the last 1 decade or so. But if you look at the Western Odisha part, you'll find that, and I also want to emphasize here that cyclone is not the only disaster that's in India. There are also disasters like drought, which is happening in Western Odisha. There is also disaster like wildfire, which is quite rampant. I don't know how many of you have really gone to Raigada district in the Mohul collection season and see the kind of wildfire that has been taking place in the whole region and the pollution taking place. Although it is man-made, you can see that there has been no proper wildfire management plan in the state, especially in the Western Odisha. So we can see this large pollution coming out of Mohul season in the Western Odisha. That's one. The second is we just recently experienced heat wave. So we all talk about cyclone, but we are not really talking about heat wave, which is a major issue in the Western Odisha. So that's also one of the another disaster that we are not talking about and which should be taken into consideration. That's one. And also, I don't know how many of you remember, a few years back, there was this large flash flood happening in Bolangir due to a sudden downpour of rain, which was unprecedented in the last 20 years. Although it was man-made to some extent, also it was due to climate change. But I want to emphasize here is that disaster management has to play a key role in terms of managing these new and upcoming disasters in Western Odisha. Let's say heat wave, let's say wildfire, or let's say flash flood, this kind of things, which is quite new to Western Odisha, and it was there from the last decade, but it has been increasing in the last few years. So that's one. So that the whole point I was trying to make is that due to the increasing impact of climate change, we have this cascading and interconnected risk, which basically means that risk in one place can affect the people in other place. For example, heat wave. If there is going to be more and more heat wave in Western Odisha, that might in a way affect the migration pattern to coastal belt. For the coastal Odisha industries who are depending a lot on the migration from the Western Odisha people to build the economy. So if the heat wave are going to increase in the next 2 decades, how we are going to manage this, which is not yet in place in terms of policy. So these are the kind of scenario that has been emerging from the Western Odisha. And what I want to emphasize here is that this should be taken into account, like the wildfires and other emerging disasters. So yeah, in the case of Western Odisha, we all know that poverty and climate change is quite closely related. And if there is more poor people in one region of the state, they are likely to be more sensitive. Their adaptive capacity is likely to be lower than people who have more economic resources. So that's there. We all know that. Now coming to the insurance part, I'm really very sorry for this technical glitch, but I would have loved to show you the disaster risk financing, which is happening around the world right now. So we talked about that how loss and damage is happening and how climate finance is really important. But the thing here is that in terms of climate finance, apart from the financing that has been done by the government from the government level, like the public sector financing, we also have a lot of scope in terms of private financing, which has been not yet been exploited in the case of Odisha yet, which is kind of disappointing. But yes, it has been there. But in the last 2 or 3 decades, there has been major development in terms of climate and disaster risk financing. I can give you example from Africa. For example, Africa Risk Capacity, which is kind of sovereign risk pool, where countries come together to form a group of countries, and they put all the risk in one basket, and they go to insurance companies for reinsurance. And then when the disaster strikes, then the insurance company will pay them. So these are the kind of like one approach, like for example, sovereign risk pool. Then we have other risk pool like CRIF. Then at the global level, we are also talking about global shield. Recently, in the last COP, GIZ launched the global shield approach, which is a like kind of complement to the loss and damage financing facility, which is going to take place there. So there has been various development in terms of climate financing around the world, and in terms of crop insurance, if you look at the crop insurance status in India, which is really good because of the large subsidized crop insurance scheme we have been in place in the whole country, and the government is providing premium subsidies to the farmers, direct subsidy to the farmers for the uptake of insurance. But and if you look at the graph, I can see that it has been increasing in the last decade, and more farmers are coming under the net of crop insurance. But still, mm, uh, still there is a large insurance protection gap in terms of Western Orissa. And as pointed out in the last presentation, I saw somewhere it was written that cotton is a major cash crop in Western Orissa, especially in Bolangir, which was also my finding 20 years back, when I went to the Western Orissa in Bolangir and Wapara district, and I asked the farmer why cotton is one of the most cash crop for you. And the reason they mentioned is the crop insurance is one of the major incentive for them to shift from rice to cotton cultivation. So which is not really a good adaptation. It is adaptation in the term, it's good, but in the long term it might lead to monocropping in the region. So when a farmer is dependent only on cotton cultivation, because uh, when there is a loss, they're going to get more out of crop insurance. So they are making sure that they are insuring the cotton crop because it is cash crop, and they get the benefit out of crop insurance. But at the same time, we are also losing the crop biodiversity in Western Orissa, which should be a matter of concern, because adaptation is good, but maladaptation in the long term is not really good, which might lead again to the trap of uh, mm, bad adaptation measures. So that's one example is there. And if you look at the other continents of Africa and Asia, they are also doing crop insurance quite a lot. But Asia is still at a very high level in terms of crop insurance coverage as compared to Africa, but not as compared to Europe, but as compared to Africa. We still have kind of good position in terms of crop insurance coverage. But when we're talking about this integrated approach, I think Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh mentioned about ecosystem-based adaptation. I think he roughly touched about it, and why it's really important to integrate both ecosystem and people in terms of talking about climate change and adaptation. And that's really already happening in terms of integrated approach in terms of climate risk management, where we're talking about risk layering approach. So we know that risk might be different. There can be a large risks like cyclone. There might be a slow onset event like drought, where all the financial instruments are not similarly applicable, or they might not work as effectively as in all the kind of disasters. So we talk about global level as something called risk layering. So we risk the layer and we provide the financial instruments depending on the kind of risk people are facing. So for the Western Reserve people, in this case, I would say that it's mostly slow onset disaster. So there should be like more financing instruments available for the people of Western Orissa in terms of this. And in this situation, government might take three roles. When we talk about insurance, we talk about the roles of government, which can be a regulator, it can be enabler, or it can be a distributor. For the case of India, in the crop insurance case, the government is mostly a distributor, where it is distributing the crop insurance scheme. But at the state level, we can also talk about regulatory role, like developing legal framework for climate disaster and risk insurance. We can also talk about enabling role for the government. Now, let's talk a little bit about the global level. So at the global level, now we are talking about something called how to really subsidize the governments, like the large national government, in terms of incentivizing them to take disaster risk insurance. And premium and capital support has been one of the major discussion area right now, and how to provide premium and capital support to the government, so that we can expand the product offering in terms of accessibility. We can have more financial innovation in terms of risk layering. We can build more market in the low and highly vulnerable population. And how can we also make sustained international support, which is kind of important at the global level, not at the regional level. But what I try to make it here say here is that the crop insurance in India is already based on a subsidized scheme, and we should move beyond the subsidized scheme and try to see what other approach, like let's say kind of what social protection works best, social protection policies work best for the people in West Odisha. So these are the kind of stuff that I wanted to mention, and there has been many challenges. For example, limited understanding of insurance, lack of suitable products, and lack of distribution channels, lack of trust in the insurers. So these are the challenges for farmers. High premium rates from the private insurance sector, and also at the same time there are many challenges for the insurance sector, like they have limited data and knowledge, they have very poor quality of designing. uh, there might be a high cost for insuring many frequent and high severity risk in many areas, which is also very interesting. And in the last few years, there has been a lot of innovation in terms of insurance, like for example, remote sensing and crop modeling, and use of smart and connected user application, blockchain technology. We can talk about picture-based insurance, value chain insurance, etc. So there has been a lot of insurance innovation in the last 2 decades in Asia and in Africa and other parts of the world. But in India, it's still kind of largely focused on indemnity-based insurance, and we are still dependent to a large extent on subsidized crop insurance scheme, which is uh, not really good for the long run. So I just want to finish with this, saying that in the case of Odisha, as I said before, we need to move beyond zero causality approach to a zero vulnerability approach across all the districts of Odisha. So it's not only the coastal belt which is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. It's also Western Odisha where drought, wildfire, other things are happening. So in the last 1 decade, we have talked a lot about zero causality, and we have talked around the world that we are like proud, feeling proud on this approach, and we have reduced the causality from the disaster. But now time has come, we should move from zero causality approach to zero vulnerability approach across all the districts, not only in coastal belt. And as I said earlier, cyclone is not the only disaster in the state. We should recognize that. Second, there need to be expansion of financial tool for low-income population and districts in Western Odisha, which has not been properly done yet, and also inclusiveness in disaster management plans. And finally, I will say we need to strengthen the social protection scheme. And if one roughly look at the sustainable development goal, you can see that although we are higher in climate action goals in terms of sustainable development goals, we are still lacking behind in many of the indicators like high poverty rate and crime against the women, gender equality is still very very low. So without creating this base things, you can really talk about bringing climate change inclusiveness into the debate. So I am again sorry for the technical glitch, and I hope I could tell whatever I could.
So thank you, Panda. So given the power sheet of time, so be with us. So we have so many questions for you. So let me invite Professor Mishra. So my apologies for the so much late. Okay, so Professor Mishra earlier with the Tehri, then moved to the EC Mart. So now he is back to Bhubaneswar. So now his floor is yours, Professor Mishra.
Thank you, Chandra. I don't know whether people still have the patience and stamina to hear more about climate change concerns. Already a lot has been spoken on the topic. What I would focus on, as you had indicated earlier, on the institutional setup, the institutional and strategic approach that one can take to deal with climate risks, and also the kind of financing opportunities, the financing related challenges that may arise out of that strategic approach. So I'll be very brief. We don't have time to go into the details, but I'll be starting from the approach. What kind of an approach a state like Odisha should be taking when we are thinking of the unique challenges that are anticipated or apprehended for a region like Western Odisha. We know that Odisha has been one of the early movers on the policy front when it comes to taking action on climate change. It's one of the first states to formulate a state action plan on climate change. I think that was immediately after the National Action Plan on Climate Change was formulated in 2008. So we had the first state action plan coming from 2010 to 2015. Then we had a second, I think, a second phase from 2015 to 18, but then it got revised, and we now have the current plan is for the period 2018 to 2023. It's important to acknowledge this action from the policy side, because it's important how the discourse on climate change is getting shaped at the policy level, because ultimately action will flow from that domain. So, however hair splitting we academics do regarding difference between adaptation and mitigation, regarding valuation challenges and all that, ultimately action flows from how the narrative is set at the policy level. And that's where it's heartening to see that there is a fair amount of advanced understanding at the policy level when it comes to taking action on climate change. I was looking at the policy documents, the three, not only the action plan documents, but also the climate budgeting exercise that has been done. And very importantly, this has come from the finance department. Again, the first state in the country to come up with a very specific, climate budget. And I'm hoping that Odisha Economic Association, the students, they should be looking at this document, and it contains a rich material for doing some very in-depth policy analysis. That's this is again an instance of Odisha, being an early mover. The third also, something, a process that is ongoing, which I've heard of. I have not kind of looked at, recent documents, but I've heard that there is a process happening to localize SDGs. So basically, after Niti Aayog has formulated, that indicators framework as to how do you take SDG targets to district and even, sub-district level. I think that process is also ongoing for Odisha. So these are important policy developments, happening in the state context, which academics should be looking at. And today's topic is about linking climate change with sustainable development goals. The title itself, bring these two phrases together. Climate change is a driver. Sustainable development goals is a goal. It's a target. And to have these two in the same topic means we are trying to frame the discourse in a certain way. We are trying to frame the narrative in a certain way. So it's important to understand whether we have the conceptual foundations to bring these together. To talk about climate change, climate action, and sustainable development goals in the same breath. Do you have a conceptual framework to accommodate these two phrases? And Chandra, you did ask that question. I was delighted when you asked that question. How do you reconcile, the adaptation, mitigation, sustainable development goals when there is so much of overlap? And we do have a framing. It's important that we understand that we do have a framing, and it has started from the IPCC fifth assessment report. In the sixth assessment report, it has got further crystallized. So you have a chapter, I think it is the 18th chapter, which talks about climate resilient development pathway, CRDP, and climate resilient development pathways. So it's a plural. And that's a framing that actually brings together adaptation and mitigation and seeks to align actions taken on these two fronts with the sustainable development goals. The exact, uh, definition that IPCC says about CRDP is processes that strengthen sustainable development and efforts to eradicate poverty and reduce inequalities while promoting fair and cross-scalar adaptation and mitigation. So this is a framing that actually combines adaptation and mitigation to realize sustainable development goal targets. Unfortunately, it has remained a framing. It has not really, gone beyond. We are still stuck with the fifth, I think the fourth assessment report framing of climate change impacts. We should be, moving towards the, risk framework, and then, more talking about these pathways rather than static vulnerability indices and all that. So when we talk about pathways, then there are challenges. There are challenges with this approach. It's conceptually it is good, and then conceptually it has the potential to accommodate other things that are also emerging on the global commitments front. We are committed to the Sendai Declaration, so the disaster risk reduction commitments are there. We will be committed to the biodiversity, the conference of parties, the negotiations that are happening on biodiversity conservation. We are a party to the desertification convention. So how all these are combined, we cannot have a action plan for each of these separately. So ultimately we are going to, we have to talk about pathways that are accommodative of all these commitments. And we do have, there is no point in talking about whether sustainable development goals are sufficient or not, what are the kind of, shortcomings of that. We do have that. That's a global commitment, and these are very aspirational. And what CRDP says is that that is the pathway to reach these aspirational goals in the short term. In the long term, we should be achieving long-term sustainable development. Now, if we talk about climate resilient development pathways, then and I would kind of not advocate, but I would be interested to see whether we can adopt this in the Odisha context as a strategic approach, as the basis of a strategic approach to climate action. So I asked myself that question, that if this is going to be the case, then what should be required? Now, the first thing is to change the conventional way of planning of climate action. And that we have been talking for long. It's nothing new, but the need to move away from sector-focused, project-focused identification of climate actions. Nilanjan did speak about IWRM, integrated river basin planning. These are basically landscape-based approaches, and that's where we need to be positioning ourselves. If we are to adopt CRT, climate resilient development pathways, as a basis for strategic approach on climate, for identifying you know climate actions. Now, when we do adopt this landscape level, some of the concerns that Architesh was raising, like hazards are not cyclones. Hazards are also, slow onset disasters, and they emerge when you recognize the unique geomorphology of a particular landscape and also the agroecology of that landscape. So when we talk about Western Odisha, then the geomorphology is basically, we have rolling uplands, we have highlands. That's the geomorphology, and that has a bearing on the kind of hazards that we would expect in that kind of a landscape. And also the agroecology, the specific agroecology is defined on that basis. So a landscape not only takes into account the unique geomorphology and the agroecology of that region, but also has a very specific focus on the kind of socioeconomic trends that are shaping that landscape, that are defining that landscape. Now, if we talk about, again, Western Odisha, recently the key thing, my in-laws place is Sambalpur, so I have some understanding of Western Odisha, and I have traveled also extensively in that. What I observed recently is the urban corridors that are emerging fast. And when I looked at the state action plan, they do recognize these two urban corridors are specifically mentioned. Uh, uh, these two urban corridors. One is Raurkela, Kansbahal, Rajgangpur. That's one urban corridor, and it is this policy document was formulated in 2018, and it was expected that in 5 years there will be significant urban congestion in urban expansion in this corridor. Then you have the second corridor, Sambalpur, Jharsuguda, Belpahad, Brajrajnagar. So you have these urban corridors, and you have the industrial clusters. You have the steel plants, you have the paper mills, and so it's a very complex landscape where you have subsistence agriculture, where you have dry lands, but at the same times you have these highly high emitting industries, the urban the dense urban complexes that are emerging. So it's going to be a big challenge when it comes to formulating the right kind of climate actions. So it is all the more important that we do not constrain ourselves in terms of thinking around adaptation or mitigation actions, but think more broadly in terms of resilient development pathways. Whatever may be the entry may be an adaptation, the entry may be a mitigation action. But as you go along that pathway, we should be talking about more like how do we negotiate the trade-offs that may emerge? How do we negotiate or how do we take advantage the synergies or the co-benefits that would exist, in that pathway? So the focus can shift theoretically from debating how much to focus on adaptation and how much to focus on mitigation, rather to focus on that particular development pathway, and emphasizing more on identifying the kind of trade-offs, the kind of synergies that would need to be addressed. And all of this would require a drastic change, a radical change in our thinking about economic policy, and something that's not really taking roots in our curriculum. Also, the whole systems thinking, not sector specific, not partial thinking, but systems thinking, where we recognize that when it comes to policy making, one has to take these socio-ecological systems as coupled systems. So you cannot talk about society in isolation of environment or ecosystem services, ecosystem biodiversity, and you cannot talk about environment in isolation of social processes, social dynamics. So that's, I think, would be the second point that I would make. That the need to experiment with landscape-based approaches. And we do have some experience. The whole watershed-based management programming is a landscape-based approach. So why cannot it be taken to specific corridors-based planning or clusters-based planning? It's possible, I would say. The third point that I would say is that when we talk about this landscape-based planning, when we talk about climate resilient development pathways, then institutionally, in whatever institutional tools we apply, like the climate budgeting tool, the contextualization needs to be reflected in that. Contextualization needs to be evident in that. So I was looking at the climate resilient budget, and it's a very interesting document that, for each of these sectors, there are 12 sectors, and each of these sectors you have the total public expenditure that has been assessed as to whether it is relevant in the context of climate change, what relevance it has, what relevance that expenditure has in the context of climate change. So there is a there is a share of public expenditure going to a sector which has been assessed for its relevance to addressing climate change challenges. So there is a climate change relevance percentage that have been calculated. Similarly, there has been a climate change sensitivity percentage that has been calculated. That how much of a program budget or how much of a public expenditure getting into a particular program is sensitive or can get negatively affected by climate change, climate impacts, or it can be positively influenced by climate change impacts. So that's very interesting that you have these two, two percentage shares that has been calculated. For example, in agriculture, the climate change relevance share, the total public expenditure going to agriculture sector in the year 2021-22, the climate change relevant expenditure is 52%. So, which means the government is saying that half of what we spent on agriculture, it is relevant, to address the impacts of climate change, either mitigation or adaptation. Of which, it again gives the figure that 31% of the public expenditure is negatively sensitive to climate change impacts, which means the benefits that one may expect from that public expenditure, nearly a third of the expenses going towards realizing that benefits, that may be negatively affected. And it's only 9% which is positively sensitive to climate change impact. So, I'm not going into the details, but there is a rich, material in this kind of data for economists to really, go for further contextualization. So, if it is for agriculture sector, then how much of it is really, getting into Western Odisha, the 10 districts? How much of that expenditure is really getting into relevant, actions, and how much of these expenditures can be sensitive and needs to be safeguarded by additional design elements, or need to be monitored properly, so that we are not, that public expenditure is not getting diverted into maladaptation consequences. So that kind of a contextualization is required. Then, if we are bringing in contextualization and in the context of institutionalizing your climate action, the fifth point that I will be making is that you need decentralized capacity hubs. And this is again in the Odisha context, we are at an advantage. So, we have these mission Shakti groups, and I think it is being highlighted as the world's largest women empowerment drive, women mobilization drive. So almost every district down to the panchayat level, we have these mission Shakti groups, which are basically the women groups. Coupled to that, you have the whole focus on establishing dairy cooperatives, on farmers producers organizations, having federations out of farmers producers organization. I was talking to a NABARD person, and he was saying that there are almost 400 farmer producer organization or interest groups already in the state. Now, this is a rich, institutional arrangement at a very local level, at a very decentralized level, that needs to be leveraged for making climate action much more effective. And even with very limited finance, you can have a big impact when these kind of networks, these kind of community institutions can be brought into the picture. Next point is funding. If you have this funding, if you have this institutional setup, then it doesn't matter actually how much funding you are able to generate. It's basically on what you are spending the funding on, what you are actually how you are utilizing the funding. And if you are talking about agriculture sector in the Western Odisha context, I would suggest that we give priority to two things, especially agriculture. And when I'm talking about agriculture, I'm taking the very broad definition of this sector. I'm including fisheries, and I'm including also livestock development, animal husbandry, livestock development, because in Western Odisha, probably much more activity is happening on livestock. You still have that as a means of livelihood, as a feasible means of livelihood, rather than agriculture, because in agriculture you already have large scale migration happening in many districts, leading to land abandonment, leading to even the small holding farmers, the subsistence farmers, they are no longer actually there. They have vanished. So
Sorry for the interruption. You have only
yeah,
1 to 2 minutes.
yes, 1 minute, definitely. And so basically, when we talk about funding, then the priorities, I would say, would be one on agri insurance. Architesh already has spoken about it, but in agri insurance, the problem is one of delivery in the local context. So it's not a design issue. Already we have a lot of expertise on designing crop insurance, disaster risk insurance. It's about delivery. What's the kind of a mechanism that you have at a local level that delivers insurance with the least friction as far as the beneficiaries are concerned? And the second area where I think we need to focus is agri infrastructure, particularly post harvest processing infrastructure. A lot of, I'll give you just one example, and then this kind of loops back to the whole concept of climate resilient development pathways. The whole thing about cold storage, having cold chains. If agriculture sector is to be viable, millet missions won't go that far. MSPs won't go that far. You can promote millets, but how many of us in this panel are actually consuming millets? It's unless dietary behaviors change in that scale in the society, then only your kind of millet mission will work out. So it is important to accept that aspirational farmers are going to go for cash crops, and it is much more strategic and much more effective to make them progressive in their adoption of technology, efficient irrigation technology, drip irrigation, and all that, and then augment their capacity for linking up with the market through this agri infrastructure like cold chains. And when you are bringing in cold chains, you can use renewable energy. You can, now the technology is there. that you can have solar based cold storage, even modular cold storage things. So food processing, cold storage, that can actually, that this is again a very nice example what climate resilient development pathways is about, where you are combining adaptation and mitigation with meeting sustainable development goals. So I'll stop there, Chandra. Thank you for the.
Yeah, so we have already passed, I think, 20 minutes. So let us have Q&A. So let us have one question to each speaker so that we can able to finish by uh, 5:30, because people might be interested to go to temple in during the evening, because today is Mahashivratri. Okay, so please ask if you have any question. One question, and please mention out the speaker name, whom we are asking question. Okay, Professor Mishra. Yes, Professor Mishra.
This is not a question, just I was listening to the deliberation of Dr. Architesh. Actually, just I want to highlight that Western Odisha, out of the 10 agroclimatic zones, the major contributing agroclimatic zones happens to be in Western Odisha, like our central means Bargarh, Sambalpur, and also another zone consisting of Kalahandi, and also towards diversification, Koraput comes. So commodity wise also you will see that for paddy, for cotton, for vegetables, and also for with respect to onion. So there are diversity, means we can see a larger scope. With respect to climate span agriculture also, for millet mission, most of
So
the
can you brief on the question, because we don't have
so
much time.
my question actually, instead of just highlighting so far as climate mitigation, adaptation and mitigation strategies are concerned. Whether we can go for a holistic approach for all these things. And I do agree with Dr. Aravinda that our solution lies in building of agri infrastructure, like even food processing, and even we can go for we can go for other climate smart agricultural policies, where Odisha has already taken a lead role in the national level. Thank you.
Okay, so any other question? Anyone?
I have a small, very brief question to Bibu and Prabjot. Just wanted to know what crops you had taken for the analysis. That was first question. And second is, how did you link to the SDGs? I somehow thought that part probably was not very clear.
Okay, Professor Murthy Mishra, to whom please, whom you are asking, please mention that.
Yeah, very good afternoon. I'm very happy to see my friends here. After a long time, I met Arvinda. Okay, but I come to my straight question. It's a common question. Anybody can uh, clarify. Do we need to emphasize on the Indian knowledge system? I mean, the indigenous and traditional knowledge for tackling such kind of climate issues in the regional setup. Because let us talk of Odisha in general, and specifically the Western Odisha, being a tribal dominant belt. There's a lot of documented and undocumented such knowledge system. What should be done in this regard? Especially, I like to listen from my friend Arvinda, because he has worked on this mountain system. So I think I will get some good ideas. Thank you very much.
So any other question? Okay, so Amrita, do you want to ask any question? No. Okay, from my side, I have few questions. First question to Archites, since I am also working on top instance nowadays. So let me ask the question, getting an answer from you, because I have a findings, but I don't know the answer. Okay, so when looking at the impact of crop insurance and income, what the Bibu and the Pradot are looking at the impact of adaptation on the income or yield or whatever maybe, when looking at the impact of crop insurance and farmers' well-being. So I found that small and major farmers are getting more benefit than the large farmers for adopting the crop insurance. Okay, so I got the findings, but I don't know the answer why. So that's why, given your experience across the countries, so that's why I'm asking you that okay, why they are getting they are more benefited, the small and larger farmers are more benefited than the basically the large farmers, basically using the I have used the propensity score matching farmer. So secondly, I'd like to ask you because you are talking about several things. So basically, one of the major problems the crop insurance the basis risk. And so there could be possible that there could be lots of the behavioral economics literature. If you look at, I have written a review paper that I highlighted the behavioral economics literature. So which could, I mean, in last 40, 50 years, we have crop insurance and we are talking about the different kinds of determinants, socioeconomic characteristics and income, premium. So all the things, although we talk and we have low premium and maybe I still awareness is a major factor. I agree with that. Other kinds of things are, but still less research, even in fact, very meager research with respect to the behavioral factors in India. Okay, there could be some research in Africa and other parts of the world, but very less research with respect to India. So how do you think that okay, that we need more research on that part? Whether that will enhance the adoption rate because after 50 years we're still less than 10%. Yeah, so now I'll give each speaker 1 to 2 minutes. Now I'll start with Dr. Vibhu. Yeah, Mike.
Unmute.
Yes.
Unmute.
Yeah, thank you so much. Purna raised his hand. Purna is also one of our team member. Purna, would you like to say something or have a question?
Purna, you would ask?
Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Archit Daspanda, sir. So
Yeah,
I'll
please,
ask later.
please. No, please ask. Please ask now. I'm giving you. Please
Yeah,
ask.
like, sir, actually, my question is like in my field experience, I came to know that when you ask farmers about the crop insurance, whether you have crop insurance, so they used to tell that we had crop insurance, we had some 3-4 times crop insurance like that. So why you are not availing now? So there is a conflict between the farmer and the company, that company which have undertaken that. The problem is there some standard crop cutting, and this farmer are expecting their crop has been damaged or their crop has been lost or something, but this company is denying. So there is some kind of conflict between these two groups, and which government is also not settling. And for this, the farmer are discouraging to go for crop insurance. So how could be this? I mean, this problem will be solved when many like you see, there will be a target for the government people. You have to cover this much of insurance for this region or like that. So what I find is like very few farmers they go for the self-interest crop insurance, like they do for themselves. I mean, from their knowledge or from their awareness, unless there is some kind of government pressure or some kind of target. So how these farmers will do, like if they will have a belief on this system and they will do with self. That is my question, sir, actually.
So okay, so let me give 1 minute to Vibhu. Please
Yeah.
answer.
Thank you. Yes, this is regarding the crops that initially when we planned the study, we thought we'll take major crops, but then then we found that that's and major. We thought it will be different for different districts, like our study areas. But then we found that like the kind of climate smart technologies that people adopt are costly for the paddy, that being the major crop, and like for vegetables. But vegetables were like bit difficult, quite complex for us to calculate all the cost, and also we limited the analysis to paddy mostly. And regarding the SDGs like have not been the focus of the study that initially planned, but I think the kind of issue that we are looking into meet several SDGs like SDG 1, 2, 3, and also 12 and 13. And to some extent, if we can extend that to 14 and 15 as well, if like.
Also 8, I guess.
Yes.
Also 8, which is employment related.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Vibhu.
Thank you,
So
sir.
I'll come back to Architas because Architas has many questions. So let me finish Professor Misra in 1 minute. So Professor Misra, I'll give 1 minute to answer.
Well, in 1 minute, I can say that traditional knowledge you can document, you can validate, and the key thing is for certification. So traditional knowledge, we are already having some examples. The use of neem, for example, in bio, pesticides. Also, the kind of traditional recipes that are getting evaluated for their nutritional benefits. So the important thing is to mainstream, these traditional knowledge by appropriate validation and certification approaches, and there are models to achieve this.
Okay, so now I'll go back to Architesh. So I'll give you 2 to 3 minutes because you got many questions. So please answer within 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chandra, and thank you for the time, and thanks for the interesting question. Again, apologies for the technical glitch. I don't know what happened. There are quite few interesting questions, and I will start from the first one on crop diversification. I think someone mentioned that crop diversification is really important, and it's happening around all the districts in Koraput and things like this. And also, what we heard from Dr. Misra earlier, that why millet is there are no consumers for millet. No, and how do you promote it? But at the same time, it's also a question that if there's government support, like for this in this kind of things, like if you can provide crop insurance to the millet farmer, and at the same time ensure that the insurance companies is getting proper reinsurance and they know how to use the product, and government can come in and help. So not only the consumption aspect but also the production aspect is quite important. And if you look at the Western USA in terms of crop diversification, from the last one decade also, I was bit worried that we are kind of shifting towards monocropping in certain regions. For example, if you look at Bargarh and Sambalpur, we all know that this is one of the highest rice growing region in the Odisha, and they produce like tons and tons of rice and nothing else. And it also, at the same time, it's one of the major emitter of greenhouse gases, rice. But we are not talking about mitigation of climate change in Bargarh and Sambalpur, how to reduce greenhouse gas from the or the methane emission from the rice cultivation. We only know that the rice is a good product, and there is a lot of money out there. Just produce as much as you can. So this kind of contradiction in terms of let's say cotton production or in terms of rice production are there, and crop diversification is really important. But at the same time, we also need government intervention, which tries to promote crop diversification rather than looking at or focusing only on one crop like cotton or like rice. So that's where I think government intervention is really important. That is one question that I like. And the second question from I think Chandra, and also the question on basis risk and things like this, it also relates to the earlier question in Koraput, where he was telling that there is why rice crop cutting instruments are there and government is coming and things like this. So I think technology has moved a lot in the last one decade in terms of implementation of crop insurance. And also Dr. Urban mentioned that it's also a matter of delivery, how the government is really delivering the crop insurance. So it's not about really giving them insurance or providing them insurance. It's also about having this effective mechanism to deliver the payout. And for example, we did a survey in Maharashtra in 2 years back, and we found that the payout is like delayed almost 1.5 year in few cases, in many cases. So that's really a clear example of ineffective delivery system in terms of crop insurance. So if you really want to cut on the basis risks, I think the most simple and the easiest way out, the low hanging fruit, is to use technology, which is slowly developing in India, like the taking photo in terms of using the GIS, in terms of using the satellite. So you don't need to go physically to ascertain whether there is a crop loss or not. So for the basis risk and question from Koraput, I will answer that we need to focus on technology. That's true. And I think that's it from my side. And I think the last point caveat I want to make, that insurance is not the solution for all the problems. So there's only one aspect of the whole climate financing in the low income population group. So it's not about insurance. Insurance is not solution for everything, and we should not take it granted. And I am also not telling that insurance is the solution. So we have to complement insurance with other social protection measures in terms of public finance management, private finance management, things like this. So we should be cautious on telling that insurance is the only solution. So thank you for
Okay,
this.
so thank you, Alok. We have already delayed in 40 minutes, close to 40 minutes. So now I'd like to thank all the speakers, starting from Niranjan Ghosh, Dr. Jena, Dr. Bibu, Dr. Ponda, Arvind Misra. So taking out a time close to 2.5 hours. And also I'd like to thank all the audience, and thanks both organizations, we and Indian Society for Ecological Economics. And thank you all for participating and also asking so many questions. Now I'll hand over to Professor Das to close the section.
It has been like, I do not know how exactly to describe. I thought all the presentations were rich, matured, and very, very well articulated, focused, apart from several things on policy and technology. So it has been a real rich experience for all of us. Even if we might have slightly crossed the time, but I think I think the value of this particular online event has been great for us, and we are extremely happy, privileged that we sort of got all of you through the INSEE link, and Chandra in particular and Vibhu in particular for thinking of making this possible. So many thanks from me, from all of us at the Odisha Economic Association. Amarendra, you want to say something?
No, I would just like to thank all of you, all the panelists, and Chandra and Vivai, and also you, no, for having this panel discussion. And it was really quite rich discussion. So thank you so much.